in our series of talking about the Bible as the story of the glory of God. And last week, if you remember, we've been talking about taking the big picture view. Last week, we really zoomed in, and we zoomed in to Abraham and to Isaac. What we really looked at is how Isaac is a type. He's a typology of Jesus. But we also talked about how Abraham taking Isaac up Mount Moriah, where he was prepared to sacrifice him to God. God then providing the ram in his place. How all of that was also a foreshadowing. That was a type of Jesus' life, his atoning sacrifice, his burial, resurrection, and his ascension, and his future return to come back to gather his bride, the church. And so today, though, since we resumed way in, today we're going to zoom way back out, and we're going big picture view. So we are going to cover a whole lot of ground. And I do want to say this, please understand, when it comes to this series, we're what, 3 months into it? And we're not even through Genesis. And we're not going to get there today. So the reason I say that is if we were just to try and go through the Bible book by book, we could spend years on Genesis. I mean, we could easily spend a year, probably two, if not more, on Genesis. And so there's a good chance I'm not going to cover every single thing that you would ever like. You're going to go, why didn't he talk about? You're more than welcome to go over here and talk about it anytime. But no, we can't. If we take that big picture view, there are some things there, but please understand, that's the reason that we read the Bible, is so that you can then read these things. But I really want you to get that big picture look. And so if we remember in Genesis chapter 12, Abraham was given a promise. He was given a promise that he was going to have a son, the promised son. That son was going to become, would be Isaac. We know that then from there he was promised that, he would have descendants that would be as numerous as the sand on the seashore, the stars in the sky. He was told that they would go into slavery, that they would be enslaved by a people that they did not know, that then though they would be set free. After they were set free, that they would then inherit a land that they had never set foot on, that kings would come from his body, and also that all peoples on earth would be blessed through him. And that's the totality, of the promise that was given. And so after the events that we talked about of last week, what we know is that Abraham came back down. We know that Hagar and Ishmael are sent away. Okay, so they are banished, they are sent away. Ishmael goes and he finds himself a wife, and so he goes and marries an Egyptian woman because his mother was Egyptian. And so at that point, Abraham then sends his servant to go and to find a wife for his son Isaac. And there's a couple of conditions. Number one, he tells him he's to go and he is to take one from his tribe, from his family, okay, is where he's supposed to go to. He tells him that he is to go and to get him a bride. It is not to be a Canaanite woman, no way, shape, matter, or form, not to be. And the other thing is that under no circumstances is his servant to take Isaac back to the homeland, back to where Abraham and Sarah and Lot, where they had come from. He was not to take him back there. So, as we talked about the next time, Isaac is up on Mount Moriah. We don't see him again until he retrieves what? Who was here? Who was here last week? Until he retrieves his, starts with a B, second letter's an R, I-D-E, bride. My goodness, do you guys pay attention? Until he retrieves his bride, okay? And his bride is Rebecca. Rebecca is the daughter of Laban, okay? Remember that name. That was going to come back. And so Isaac is married to Rebekah. We know that Abraham dies. He's about 175 years old when he dies. And so Isaac and Rebekah get married. Isaac is probably 40. This is after, and one of the reasons I said that Isaac willingly allowed his father to sacrifice him is he was probably 37 years old when this happened, and so he could have taken Dad. But at the age of 40, he and Rebekah are married. And so they then for 20 years can't have kids. But unlike mom and dad, they don't take things into their own hands. Instead, they pray about it. And so prayers are answered. Rebekah gets pregnant. When she is pregnant, then she is concerned because there is a jostling going on in her womb. There's something that is a little funky here. And so she inquires of the Lord. And in Genesis chapter 25, the Lord tells her this: 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. And so we know is when it comes time to be born, these twin boys they're in her womb. The first one that comes out is red and he's hairy, and his name is Esau. And so he is the first that is born, and out comes would be his younger brother, Jacob, grasping his heel, who is the second one to come out. Now, the reason this is important of which one was first is that all throughout, inheritance was always based upon who was the firstborn. And what you had was birthright, and you had inheritance. And they were 2 different things. The inheritance was what you got when Dad died. And basically, the eldest would always get a double portion. And what that means, if he had 2 sons, it was divided into 3 parts. And the oldest son got part 1, part 2, and the second son got part 3. Okay, so you got a double portion. You always added 1 there. But the other is the birthright was that they would become the patriarch of the family when Dad was gone. So what that would be is that when Isaac had passed away, it should have been Esau who became the patriarch of the family. That's his birthright. Okay, it's his position. And so then we read, a little bit later in Genesis 25, we read about Jacob and Esau, and one day we all have heard the story. Esau comes running in. He is famished. He's been out hunting. He's starving. He thinks he's going to start. He's kind of like my 14-year-old. I've got to eat now. I'm going to die. And so at that point, he says, give me some of your stew. And so what does he get told? Jacob then says, he goes, well, I will, but sell me your birthright. And so he's like, well, what good is it to me? So he sells his birthright for a bowl of soup. Okay? And now you talk about trading something that is a lifelong inheritance, and he trades it for a moment of pleasure. And the thing is, it's easy for us to laugh at him when we do, like, what an idiot. But before we laugh at Esau, I think that we all need to probably turn the mirror around and look at ourselves, because we do the same thing. We trade long-term things for short-term pleasure. Look at what's going on in our society right now. And, God designed marriage to be a blessing between a man and a woman, one man, one woman, to be shared within the bonds of holy matrimony. But what do? We are exchanging the promise and the blessing of marriage for a moment of pleasure, whether it's whether it's extra, whatever, it doesn't matter. We're trading that promise that God has made for fleshly pressure. We do the same thing. God says that he'll provide everything. God says he will provide. Be content. Right? And what do? We trade that for striving, because we want more, bigger, faster, shinier. It's got to be. And so we work so that we can have more money, buy a bigger house, get a faster car, get all of this stuff, even though God said, I'll give you everything that you need. We are told all throughout, Jesus promises that we have an abundant life. He said, I've come that they may have life and have it to the full. But that's not good enough for us. And so instead of leaning into the promise that he made of an abundant life, what do? We start chasing satisfaction. whether it's in the form of drugs or gambling or sex or pornography, whatever it is, we exchange what God has promised, and he has said, no, he goes, have an abundant life. Well, that abundant life is lived in him, but we start looking for satisfaction elsewhere, and we trade eternal things for temporary moments of pleasure to make us feel better. So, we can sit here and talk about Esau all we want, but we need to turn the mirror around and look at ourselves. In fact, Hebrews 12:16 calls Esau godless. And the reason that he's called godless is because he treated holy things as common. He was given a birthright, and to him, it didn't matter. What good is it to me? And so he traded it. And so I think the question that we need to ask a lot of times is, what am I trading for something else right now? What is it that God has promised me? What is it God has provided for me? What is something that I know that God wants from me, that I am trading that in for something to make me feel better, look better, to other people, whatever it is right now? That's a question that we've all got to ask. Eventually, we know that Jacob we know that Jacob would conspire with, there's a whole lot of names in here. If you ever get confused, it happens to all of us. So, Jacob and his mother conspire to trick Isaac out of giving his blessing and the birthright to Esau. And so they conspire, but I go back sometimes and I'm kind of like, okay, was it really conspiring? Did they really trick him? If God had said this is the way it's going to be anyway? But it's like, sometimes that just, you put a little duct tape on my head, because it's like, how does this, it's God. And he says, my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. But after Jacob and his mom, after they trick Isaac, well, then, needless to say, Esau wants him dead. He threatens to kill him, and so Jacob is then sent away. Where is he sent? He is sent back to Laban's family. He is sent back to go and stay there, flee there, Nahor, and to find a wife, okay? Because... And what we find is that his mom says, oh, no, I don't want him to marry one of the Canaanite women. And so they send him away. Well, Esau hears how much it's going to bother mom and dad if somebody marries a Canaanite woman. So what does he do? He goes out and finds him a good Canaanite woman that is a daughter of Ishmael. And so he goes to Ishmael and he marries one of Ishmael's daughters. And so we got Ishmael and Esau, otherwise known as Edom, which, by the way, pay attention to that, because that comes back here in a little bit. So, because here's the deal. Esau would become, like I said, he's called Edom sometimes, and so he is the father of the Edomites. Okay, now if you read in your Bible, you find the Edomites, and the Edomites are Edomites, not Edomites, Edomites. They are enemies of Israel, but Israel is never to completely destroy them. Why? Because they are a close relative. So they're not to destroy them completely. And so that's fine. But then we read, we're going to get later on, when we get into the next part of the book, which would be the New Testament, of an Edomite who converts to Judaism, and then when the Roman government comes in and takes over Jerusalem and Israel and rules there, this guy is installed as the king of Judea, and his name is Herod the Great. He is the same one who would be visited by wise men when Jesus was born, and he would then set out to have all the children, all the boys 2 years and older, murdered in order to try and stop Jesus. That is the story of Esau. So, anyway, back along Jacob's journey, we know that he stops at Bethel, and that is where he sees a vision of a stairway, of a ladder going up to heaven and going up and down. It's Jacob's ladder, is what we read about. And so Then he arrives. When he arrives in Nahor, Laban's family, he encounters Rachel. He falls madly in love with Rachel. And after staying a little bit, he decides, I want to marry her. And so he goes to Dad. He says, what would it take? And he says, work 7 years and I'll let her be your wife. And so he's like, okay, no problem. And so 7 years is just like no time at all. Flies by, comes to the day, it's wedding day. And so Laban then on the wedding night, instead of sending Rachel in, he sends in the older sister Leah. Okay? And so, and I'm not quite sure how this works, but we know that Jacob got up the next morning, he was upset. I'm just going to leave that there. I don't know. I wonder on that one sometimes. But it's in there, so it's truthful. I know that. But so he's upset. And so at that point then, Laban says, well, I'll tell you what, if you work another 7 years, I will give you Rachel. And he says, okay. So he's going to work another 7 years. So he gets Rachel as a wife right then, but he works another 7 years. And so all throughout this time, Laban keeps kind of changing his pay. You know, he's always trying to do things to keep Jacob poor, because here's what he's figured out. Everything that Jacob touches turns to gold. When he's involved with something, it prospers, it excels. And so, you know what? I don't want him going anywhere. I'm getting wealthy because God is blessing him. So I'm going to keep him here so he doesn't leave. And in fact, here's where we find one of these interesting accounts is that Jacob goes to Laban and he says, okay, here's the deal. He says, you keep taking, my animals so that we know they're mine. How about I will take and only keep the ones that are striped and spotted, as far as the sheep and the goats. And I'll keep them and you can have all of the others. And Laban's like, okay, not a problem at all. And he thinks he's going to trick Jacob. So he takes all the spotted ones out of there. And so Jacob then, and I don't know where he got the idea. I'm assuming he got it from God, but there's nothing magical about it. But he then takes and he peels the bark off of limbs and sticks, and he puts them in the troughs where the animals come. And so when the strong animals come to mate there, they mate in front of these striped sticks, and as a result, the offspring that are born are spotted and speckled and striped. And so the strongest ones become Jacob's, and the weak ones are the ones that become Laban's. And so actually in Genesis chapter 30, it says this, verse 42 and 43. It says, so the weak animals went to Laban and the strong ones to Jacob. In this way, the man, meaning Jacob, grew exceedingly prosperous and came to own large flocks and maidservants and menservants, and camels and donkeys. And here's what I think we need to hear out of that. You're going to be mistreated. You're going to be mistreated. Okay? We all are. There are times when people are going to treat you wrong. There are times when people are going to not want you to succeed. There are times when you're going to be taken advantage of. And let's be honest, human nature is what? We want to get revenge. We're eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. By golly, I'm going to get him. Or we want to be vindicated. We want to stick it to them so that everybody will know that they were wrong and I was right, and that they hurt me. Or we want to control the situation, and that happens a lot. We do this kind of trying to control it and manipulate it and make it work out in our favor. Okay, isn't that usually, that's what we usually do. Okay, but the other option that we have is to follow the example of Jacob here. And I think that is number one, Jacob just kept working. He just kept working. He kept doing what he was supposed to do. He, all throughout there, he kept trusting God. He didn't know what it was going to look like, but he kept trusting God. And he was obeying. Like I said, I don't know what the striped sticks, there's nothing magical about the striped sticks. There was nothing there. But we assume that if he did it, that he was told in one way or another to have that happen. Okay? But the thing is that he left the outcome to God. He's like, okay. Because he said, I'm going to take all of the spotted and speckled, and we know that Laban came in and did what? He had his sons take all the spotted and speckled ones and take them out. So he gets there tomorrow, shows up, there's no spotted or speckled ones. Yesterday there were. Now they're not. And so he had been mistreated, been taken advantage of, but he just trusted God to make it work out. And I think the thing that we need to figure out is, because you and I, we are not responsible for controlling the outcome. That's not our job. We are not responsible for enforcing justice. We are not responsible for winning every battle. What we are responsible for is to obedience to God. You know, when God tells us what to do, that is in the good times and the bad. It's easy to follow God when things are going well, isn't it? Oh, man, everything's rocking and rolling. Love the Lord. Jesus is great. He is blessing me. And then the wheels fall off and the bottom drops out. And that's when it gets tough. But that's what we're told to do, is just to continue to be obedient to him, good times and bad. We're told to be faithful. Keep doing what he tells us to do. That's what faithfulness is. Faithfulness is just continuing to do what God has told you to do. Faithful, I'll tell you what, if you want to know what faithfulness looks like, imagine, for those of you that are the parents or the grandparents of girls, okay? Faithfulness is what you want their husbands to look like. You want an example of what faithfulness is. And that's what God calls us to with him, is to follow us. You just keep doing what he's called us to do. And then trust. You know, the Bible, I've said this, it may not be written about us, but it is written to us. And so everything in here, God explains how we should have right relationships in every arena of our lives, and the way we should live, the way that we should do things. And so trust says, even when this doesn't seem to make sense, I'm going to listen to it. Trust says, even when God's ways, just, man, I don't know how in the world that's going to play out, I'm going to trust him to make it, because that's exactly what Jacob did. And so, you know, I always said, you can only control what you can control. And the only thing you can control is you. That's it. Okay? So whether you're talking about in your relationships, maybe in your job, maybe it's your work, it may be in your home, you know, whether you're talking about with your spouse or with your kids or maybe with a parent or whatever, or maybe in some circumstance, you know, some situation that is going on right now, the fact is that the only thing you can control is you. So leave the rest of it to God. That's what it looks like, I think, to live this out, is that Jacob said, you know what, I can't change Laban. I can't change any of this other stuff. You know what I can do? I can keep doing what God told me to do, and I'm going to trust him to make it all work out. So after this, we know that Jacob and his family, they head back to the land that had been promised to Abraham. And since it was promised to Abraham, it was promised to Isaac. And since it was promised to Isaac, it was promised to Jacob as well. And so along the way, we know that Rachel dies, giving birth to a son. Okay, that son is Benjamin. And Rachel gave birth to two sons. The first one we know is Joseph, is the first one spent. Joseph is Jacob's favorite. Okay, it's his favorite son. And it's very apparent that it's his favorite son. He shows that in in the coat of many colors that he gives him, the way that he really takes care of him, but also in the way that he protects him, because the other sons go elsewhere and Joseph does not, because Dad's going to protect him. And so what we find is that he is the favorite son. And then one day he has these dreams. He has a couple of dreams. And the dreams intimate that his dad and his brothers and all are going to bow down to him. In other words, he's going to rule over them. Not they're going to worship, but that he is going to rule over them. So we take the fact that he's the favorite son, that Dad is very clear about the fact that Joseph is the favorite son. And then he has these dreams, which is, by the way, you're going to serve me one day. And needless to say, between the dreams and the ego and the favoritism, his brothers grow to hate him. They hate him so much that one day they are out in the fields, And as they are out in the fields, Joseph is sent out to him to check on them. He finds them. They see him coming, and they're like, here he comes. Let's kill him. We're going to kill him. They're going to kill their own brother. And so they get talked out of it, and so they don't kill him. So instead, they just capture him, and then they throw him in a cistern, and they're just going to leave him there, which means they're going to kill him. He's not going to get out of it. But so then they're like, well, we're not getting anything out of it. What good is it if we just let him die? So what we ought to do? Ooh, here comes some travelers, these merchants that are Midianites, and so we'll just sell him. We'll sell him to them. We'll sell him into slavery. Now, I will say this interesting little side piece here. Depending on your translation, there are two tribes that kind of get used interchangeably in this account. And it is the Midianites, who are also they're referred to later on as the Ishmaelites. And then again, they're referred to as the Midianites. Okay, Ishmael, that we know is the son of Abraham and Hagar, okay, who was the Egyptian. And then we also know that Abraham got married again later to a woman by the name of Keturah, had other kids. One of them was a young man by the name of Midian, and he became the Midianites. And so we have probably the two of them together, but they're the ones then that Joseph is sold into slavery. So he's sold to them. They then take him to Egypt. So they get him to Egypt. They take him in, and they sell him to a guy by the name of Potiphar. And Potiphar buys him, and so Potiphar puts him to work in his house. Well, what Potiphar notices, though, is that everything that he does seems to excel, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is just incredible. I'm getting so wealthy because everything that Joseph touches turns to gold, and God is with him. So he elevates him and makes him basically number two in the house. He says, that's everything is under your purview. Take care of it because everything that you touch excels. And so apparently Joseph was not only very successful, but he also must have been good looking, because Potiphar's wife then sees him running around the house, and she's like, I want some of that. And so she tries seducing him. And he keeps rebuffing her, and he says, no, not going to happen, not going to happen. And so, I'm sorry, did I say that wrong? I saw everybody, how dare you. But she does, she tries to seduce him. He will have nothing to do with it. So then we have this day to where he is in the house, and she catches up with him, grabs his clothes, she tries again, and he just takes off and runs. And so he runs out of the house, and what does Potiphar's wife say? She accuses him of attempted rape. So when Potiphar comes home, what does he do? He has him thrown into jail. And so he's in jail on charges of attempted rape. While he's there, the jail keeper, he's kind of like, man, I tell you what, you are good at everything you do. Everything that you touch, I don't have to do anything. And so he elevates him to a high position as well. And so because everything is just going well when Joseph is in charge. And so one day there's two jailmates that come in. One of them is the former cupbearer for Pharaoh, and the other is the former baker for Pharaoh. And so they're in there, and one day Joseph notices that they're looking kind of upset. He asks them what it is. They tell him about these dreams that they had. And so he interprets the dreams for them. And the dreams say that, one of them is going to get beheaded and the other one is going to get his job back. And he tells the one that's going to get his job back, hey, when you get back into the palace, tell Pharaoh about me. And so the guy gets back into the palace and completely forgets. And so 2 years later, yes, 2 years later, Pharaoh has a couple of dreams. And so as he's telling these dreams, nobody can explain them. And so all of a sudden, the cupbearer goes, oh, I forgot. There was this guy that knows how to interpret dreams. And so they call Joseph. Joseph comes in. He tells Pharaoh the interpretation of the dreams. And the dreams are, it's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And then he even goes beyond that, and he says, so here's what I would do. This is how I would handle the problem. And Pharaoh's so impressed not only with the dreams, but also the fact that he put together this idea. He says, you know what? I'm making you number two in all the kingdom. There is nobody greater in the kingdom of Egypt except for me. I'm the only one that is above you. And so he puts him in charge of everything. Now the famine comes along. And so as the famine is happening, it's not only in Egypt, but it is also spills over into the land of Canaan. Well, who lives in Canaan? Oh, well, we have got Jacob and all of his sons, okay? Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin. Now, they all live in Canaan, and so I just kind of like doing so. It's kind of like, keeps it in my mind is what it does. And so they are in the famine. So what do they have to do? They're like, oh my goodness, I'll tell you what, we're going to have to go. We hear that there is grain in Egypt. So they go to Egypt. When they do, they encounter a guy that's in charge, and they don't know that it's Joseph. Now, Joseph knows he's dealing with these brothers, but these brothers don't know that they're dealing with Joseph. And so he tests them, and he tries them, and then eventually he reveals himself to them, and he says, this is who I am. And so after that happens, we know that the entire family does what? The entire family relocates to Egypt, actually to the land of Goshen. But here's the deal. Jacob and his family never end up in Egypt, in the land of Goshen, if it is not for the fact that Joseph is the number 2 man in all of Egypt. And the thing is that they would never encounter Joseph as the number 2 man in charge of all of Egypt if it hadn't been for a famine that went from Egypt and into the land of Canaan. And the thing is that Joseph would have never been number 2 in the land of Egypt if he had not been left in prison for an extra 2 years. And he never would have met the Pharaoh if he hadn't been there for the extra 2 years. He never would have been in prison if Potiphar's wife hadn't accused him falsely of rape. And he never would have been falsely accused of rape if he hadn't been living in Potiphar's house. He never would have been living in Potiphar's house if he hadn't been sold by his brothers into slavery to the Midianites. And he would have never been sold if it hadn't have been for the dreams that God had given him about what was going to happen. And the thing is that Jacob would have never had all of those sons if it weren't for the fact that he had been tricked by Laban into having Leah as his first wife, Rachel as his second, which then brought in, Bilhah and I can't remember the other one's name. But if he hadn't brought them in, all of this, it traces back. And so what we find is that about 215 years before Jacob and his family walked into the land of Goshen, God had appeared to a man named Abram and said, I am making you a promise. And as a result of that, 70 descendants of Jacob, Israel, who would become the 12 tribes of Israel, entered into Goshen in Egypt and lived next to a people that they had never known. Don't tell me God is not sovereign. I sit there and I look at that, and time after time after time, you're just reminded that nothing is random. That all of the twists, all of the turns, and God works them out. Nothing is wasted. Nothing's outside his sovereignty. And so here really is the question that I have, and what is the burden that you are carrying right now that just feels absolutely overwhelming? What is the situation that you find yourself in that seems just completely unfair? What prayer is it that you keep throwing up there, and you feel like it has gone unanswered? What betrayal happened to you that you still carry around hurt from that betrayal? In other words, what are you facing today that is too big for the God who orchestrated and moved through nations and politics and families and division and conflict? What are you facing that is too big for him? What are you facing that he can't handle? Because I think we look at these things, and I think the story of Abraham to Joseph tells us that God is writing a bigger story than any of us can see. And if you belong to him, you are a part of that story. There is nothing that you will face that he cannot and has not overcome. I would challenge you this week. Go back and take time and read. Read the story from Abraham to start in 21. Start in Genesis 21 and read through Genesis 47. And tell me that you got things in your life, that you got things at your job, that you've got bills that you are facing, that you've got a situation you come up against, that you've got a diagnosis that you've just gotten, or you've got a relationship that you're in the middle of, or a relationship that is estranged. You tell me as you read that what it is in your life that God can't handle. And you're going to find if you truly read it as what it is, that there's not a single thing that he cannot handle. And there is no length that he will not go to pull you through, if you will. We always sing this song just to trust and obey. But do you realize it's that simple? Trust him and obey. When he says go, you go. When he tells you where and you say, that don't make much sense to me, you trust. What are you facing? Are you facing anything that's too big for God? If we're honest, we're not.